So friends, it's rare, isn't it, for the US-Canada border to make headlines. Usually it's our southern border with Mexico that gets all the press. But this week, as Canadian truckers blockade bridges and border crossings to protest COVID public health mandates, all eyes are turned to our border to the north. And it reminds me of another story that took place along the US-Canada border that drew headlines in its own days. It's a story about the great African-American musician and civil rights activist, Paul Robeson. Robeson, of course, was an internationally renowned bass baritone vocalist who traveled the world delighting audiences while also speaking out against racial injustice in the US. Robeson's forthrightness about American racism didn't endear him to the US government, who made it clear to him that he had no business airing the nation's dirty laundry abroad, especially in the midst of a Cold War. Determined to silence him, the State Department in 1952 actually revoked Paul Robeson's passport and prohibited him from leaving the country. Later that same year, though, Robeson received an invitation to give a recital in the Canadian province of British Columbia. With no passport, Robeson was unable to accept the invitation. But he and his Canadian concert organizers thought up a better idea. One day, Robeson drove in a flatbed truck to the northernmost point of the state of Washington, right on the border with Canada. And right across the border from Robeson, just on the other side of some invisible line in the soil, nearly 40,000 Canadians showed up with folding chairs. Robeson stepped up onto the bed of his pickup and sang across the border to the people of Canada. Now, the Palestinian-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye wrote a poem about this concert called "Cross That Line." Her poem and the story itself raises questions that I touch on in today's message. Questions like, who are my people? And what borders must I cross to find them? So here's Naomi Shihab Nye's poem, "Cross That Line." Paul Robeson stood on the northern border of the USA and sang into Canada, where a vast audience sat on folding chairs waiting to hear him. He sang into Canada. His voice left the USA when his body was not allowed to cross that line. Remind us again, brave friend, what countries may we sing into? What lines should we all be crossing? And what songs travel toward us from far away to deepen our days? A border can be a dangerous place. Just ask anyone who's ever risked their life to cross one. By one recent count, more than 500 people die every year trying to cross the southern border of the United States from Mexico. A border is a place where lives and livelihoods are disrupted, where cultures clash, where nations quarrel, where fences are built and electrified and guards patrol with dogs and automatic weapons. The border, in other words, can be a place of peril. But as Paul Robeson showed us, it can also be a place of possibility and improvisation, where strangers meet and connections are made, where cultures mix and mingle, and where new cultures, hybrids, are born. A place where ideas are shared, goods and services exchanged, where a veritable Pentecost of languages is spoken, where difference is the name of the game and thriving demands that one learn to embrace and mediate that difference. So a border can be a place of possibility as well as peril. Now, borders, of course, don't only exist between nations. Sometimes they run right through nations, dividing Sunni from Shia, north from south, red from blue. Borders can divide cities and towns too, a railroad track or a six-lane highway separating the haves from the have-nots. Borders can even divvy up a place as small and self-contained as an island, can't they? And sometimes the borders run right through us, right through our very selves and identities. A child born to a mother from Africa and a father from Germany. A daughter born in this country, raised by parents who immigrated from another. A citizen of blue America who goes home every Thanksgiving to red America, hoping to discover a little purple. If we look closely, we can all probably identify some borders that run right through us, shaping who we are. Borders that we've had to negotiate and even embrace in order to be healthy and whole human beings. And as Paul Robeson's story illustrates, there are still others of us who feel called to the border. Because where some build walls, we feel compelled to build bridges. A people who acknowledge the peril of the border, but who also celebrate its possibility, its promise. People who believe deep down that the future of our small, fragile, and interdependent planet requires that we learn to live with one another. And not just live with one another, live for one another. We are called to the border because the people we think of as our people, the people whom we call family and whom we care for, because they exist on all sides of these many borders. I want to invite us now to pause for a moment to consider the borders that are present in our own lives and the ways that in which we have been or are being invited to cross borders and bridge divides. And as we do, let's honor Paul Robeson's example of creatively inhabiting the border, of creatively crossing borders by listening to a spiritual about border crossings that Robeson often sung. I'm going to invite you to just contemplate Deep River, performed by Perry Roper, a former congregant of mine at All Souls, who gave his permission for me to use this video in our service today. Andy, if you could cue it up.
Deep river, my home is over Jordan. Deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground. Deep river, my home want to cross over into campground. Oh, don't you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land, where all is peace? Oh, deep river, Lord, I want to cross over into campground.
I know that many of us feel drawn to the borders of our world, to work for justice, to build peace and understanding, and to practice solidarity with those whose struggles may or may not be our own. Negotiating all the differences of these borders can be difficult work, but there's no doubt in my mind that it's holy work. And I want to invite us to bring a question to this work of ours. The question, who are my people? Because, it's one thing to work for somebody else's liberation and kind of keep it at arm's length, but it's quite another to discover, to know deep down that your liberation is inextricably bound up with theirs. And it's one thing to think of solidarity as an effective political strategy or organizing strategy, but it's an entirely different thing to imagine solidarity as a spiritual practice, as the practice of living faithfully and accountably with those who might live on the other side of a border from us. And in the process, discovering a more full and robust understanding of who we are and who our people are. To ask, who are my people, is to take our intersectional work for justice to a deeper level. To see it not only as a struggle for justice, but as an invitation to discover the fullness of ourselves and our people. Now, if this all seems a little nebulous to you, let me tell a story that I think will make it more tangible and concrete. A story that illustrates the kind of spiritual transformation that's possible when we bring this question, who are my people, into our work for justice. Some of you know that a while back, I was privileged to help lead the struggle to legalize gay marriage here in our nation's capital. At the time, DC became just the 7th jurisdiction in the country to permit same-sex marriage, the first below the Mason-Dixon line. But opponents of marriage equality believed that they could win by exploiting the divisions that already existed in a diverse and segregated city. They tried to drive a wedge between gay and straight folks, between white folks and people of color, between rich and poor, between secular people and people of faith. I helped found a clergy group that advocated for marriage equality and at the same time sought to build bridges across many of these supposed divides. And I led that group with 2 clergy friends of mine, colleagues, the Reverends Dennis and Christine Wiley, who are really the heroes of this story. The Wileys were the husband and wife co-pastors of a Black Baptist church in Anacostia. Now, No one in DC expected to find a heterosexual African-American Baptist clergy couple working with someone like me to lead a struggle for marriage equality. But together we built a coalition of more than 100 DC religious leaders from many faiths, races, and cultures, and from every neighborhood in our segregated city. As Black Baptists, the Wileys risked a lot to help lead a movement for gay rights. They lost some longtime members of their church. They lost a lot of pledges. But they remained utterly committed to the cause. And I'll never forget a story that Dennis Wiley told after it was all over, when some of us gathered to reflect on what we learned from that struggle. Dennis said that for him, the highlight of the campaign came at the very end, on a night before the final vote of the DC Council. Supporters of marriage equality had gathered at a community rec center for one last big rally. We had a good turnout that night. You could just imagine hundreds of people packing the gymnasium, people of many ages, races, cultures, gender expressions. But most of the folks there that night were LGBTQ folks. And we'd asked Reverend Dennis Wiley to be our final speaker, to bring it home like only a Baptist preacher can. And so at the end of the rally, he stepped up to the lectern to speak. And as he told us the story later, he said, you know, I got up to speak that night and I looked out at the sea of beautiful faces, all of whom were waiting for me to share with them a word of hope. And at that moment, I realized something. I realized that for my whole life, I'd been taught that these beautiful people were not my people. That as a straight, Black, male Baptist minister, I wasn't supposed to be at that rally. Everyone had told me that these weren't my people. But then he said, I remembered the story of when Jesus is sitting with his disciples, a story from the Bible. He's sitting with his disciples, the people with whom he had built and shared a movement. And someone interrupts them to inform Jesus that his family, his parents, are waiting for him outside. And Jesus points to the disciples and says, no, this is my family. Dennis said, I realized that through this struggle, my understanding of who my family is has changed, has grown. And that, he said, has been the greatest gift of all for me. Who are my people? It's perhaps the most important spiritual and moral question that we can ask in these times. Because to know who our people are is to know in large part who we are. And because our people and our family refer to those to whom we feel a certain duty of responsibility and care and love, those to whom we feel morally and ethically accountable. So it says a lot about how and for whom we will show up in the world. When William Ellery Channing, the 19th century founder of American Unitarianism, asked himself the question, who are my people? He famously answered, I am a living member of the great family of all souls. He didn't say the great family of some souls, or white souls, or rich souls, or straight souls, or souls with PhDs. He said, I'm a part of the great family of all souls. Now that's some Unitarian Universalist family values right there. To be frank with you, I'm not sure if it's possible for most or even some of us to experience the kind of universal siblinghood of which Channing spoke. That's a big stretch of our moral imaginations. Like many of our deeply held religious values, it may be an ideal that we are always striving towards, but that is always just beyond our grasp. But you know what? If every day we wake up and say, these are my people, and if every day we mean at least one person more, well, then I think we're on the right path. We're on the path to a spiritual and moral change of heart. So friends, I ask you, who are your people? Who is your family? How many borders will you cross to reach out and find them? For whom will you show up in these times of division and fear? One day, a wise rabbi asked a group of students a question. He asked them, how do you know the moment when the night has ended and a new day has dawned? The students thought about it for a while. Is it the moment, asked one student, when you see an animal in the distance and you can tell whether it's a sheep or a dog? No, said the rabbi. Is it when you look at a far off tree and you can make out whether it's a fig or an olive? Again, the rabbi said no. Then tell us, Rabbi, how do you know the moment when the night is over and a new day has dawned? It's when you can look at the face of any person, said the rabbi, and see there the face of your sister or your brother. That's when you'll know a new day has begun. Friends, may we experience the dawn of that new day. Amen.